Lani Shiota calls addiction a problem that exists from cells to society. It spans the chemistry of craving in someone's brain to their individual choices to the support systems that exist in their family and community. To treat and prevent addiction, we have to understand it on all those levels. And that's no small task. That's why Lani Shiota started the Substance Use and Addiction Translational Research Network, or SATRN, which brings scientists, healthcare providers, and policymakers together, connecting the latest research with practice and treatment. Welcome to Lab Coat Optional from Arizona State University, the show where advanced research meets everyday curiosity. I'm Pete Zrioka. In each episode, we talk with the researchers behind the work, minus the jargon, and definitely minus the lab coat. This episode, we're joined by Lani Shiota, a professor of psychology and the director of SATRN, who spent her career researching emotional mechanisms of health behavior and behavior change. And she has a growing body of work dedicated to addiction. She shares what science tells us about addiction, prevention, and recovery, and how compassion might be some of the strongest medicine of all. Lani, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I would love to kind of pull back and look at the scope of the problem that we're facing when it comes to substance use disorder. Are rates increasing?
Rates of some substances are increasing and others are declining. Part of the context for this is that in 2020, alcohol use went through the roof.
Wonder why.
I wonder why, right? There wasn't a whole lot else to do, so people started drinking. Now, the good news is that has started to come down. Rates of use of other substances is going up. And actually, one of the challenges in this field is to be on the leading edge of what people are actually taking.
Okay.
One thing that's really complicated is that for the last 8 to 10 years, the focus has been very powerfully on opioids, including prescription opioids as well as heroin and increasingly fentanyl, because they're lethal. They are absolutely lethal. And because, in this case, thankfully, there is both a medication that is far and away the most effective treatment for opioid use disorder, and there's something that will save your life if you're in the middle of an overdose, and it's just right up the nose.
Narcan.
Right, Narcan.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So it was a combination of that being the dominant substance that was causing death and pain, and the fact that we actually had the tools to deal with it has been the focus really for the last decade and change. I'm not going to say that that's gone away. It really hasn't. But we are seeing that there are other drugs that are coming in now. Okay. And so tackling substance use is always figuring out and then catching up to what's the drug, right? What's the drug of choice this year? And increasingly, people take a whole bunch of different substances. So that makes it difficult to answer your question. I think it's fair to say that if you're looking at alcohol, the problem has dipped slightly from the extraordinary highs of 2020 and 2021, but other substances continue to increase.
So you mentioned over the last 8 to 10 years, opioids have been getting a lot of the attention. Illicit drugs in general get a lot of attention because they're so lethal.
Absolutely.
Right? But tobacco, alcohol, those are also, I mean, if you go by the numbers, they're very dangerous.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Happy to do so, because that's a really important part of this story. So we talk about the illicit drugs because they're illegal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason why we talk about them. Let's be honest. They are perceived as being more dangerous because they're illegal. And there's a presumption out there that the reason that they were made illegal is because they're more dangerous. That's generally not true. It's just not true. So when you when you look at what's most lethal, tobacco is again an order of magnitude more lethal. It kills more people every year than all of the illegal drugs combined. alcohol is not that far behind, right? So when you talk about the legal drugs, addictive drugs, substances that we have in this country, they are way, 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 way more harmful. They're causing way more harm to health across our society in terms of the raw numbers than any of the illegal drugs. Now, I will qualify that by saying that there are some important differences here. The drugs that we think of that sort of come most easily to mind in terms of dangerous illegal drugs, things like methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, they are very highly addictive for most people, and they can cause damage to your health and to your life much more rapidly than is typically the case for, say, alcohol. It's also difficult, again, for most people, not everybody, to maintain moderate occasional use of those drugs, those substances, than is the case for alcohol. But again, this is really, it's complicated space. Nicotine is also highly, highly addictive. And anyone who's tried to quit, has been a regular smoker, tried to quit, will tell you it's extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
Of the people who try to quit smoking every year, it's a very large number of people, only about 10% succeed for longer than 6 months to a year. So when we talk about damage, it's damage on what timeline?
Yeah.
Damage from what immediate causes versus the longer term causes. What do we mean by addiction, right? And what are we talking about when we talk about dependence? The definition of substance use disorder is very clear, and it's not what most people think it is.
Please define it.
So the definition of substance use disorder, whether we're talking about alcohol or cocaine or opioids, is an inability to stop or reduce your use of the substance despite it causing significant problems and harm in your life. That's really, I mean, there are other symptoms that we can talk about, but that's really what it comes down to. It's damaging your life and you can't stop.
Which there's a distinction there from addiction.
Yes. And again, addiction is actually a term that gets used
interchangeably, I think.
It's interchangeably in colloquial speech. And it also has, again, somewhat different meanings depending upon what aspect of addiction we're talking about.
Okay.
But we're often, in that case, talking about a biological or psychological pull that means that you can't really function well without it. Now, one way that I like to contextualize this is, and I joke about this, I'm a born addict.
Okay.
I'm literally a born addict in that I was born addicted to caffeine. My mother, when she was pregnant with me, had a very close friend who was Turkish and insisted that the only way to survive pregnancy was to drink lots of Turkish coffee. So I don't know if you've ever had Turkish coffee.
It's very strong.
Stuff is strong.
Yeah.
And she was downing several cups of this a day. So I came out and presumptively just full-blown addicted to caffeine. I didn't have any till I was about 12. And then I had my first cup of coffee and went, is that what life is supposed to feel like? And never looked back. So I am an avowed caffeine addict. I don't function well without it. I really don't.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not hurting my life.
Right.
It's not doing any damage to my health, nor is it damaging my relationships, nor is it problematic for my career.
Okay. I would love to talk about prevention. Let's shift to
Sure,
prevention.
great, absolutely.
I grew up in the DARE era of drug education.
Me too.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I don't think I remember what DARE stands for. I was trying to remember today, which maybe is indicative of how effective it was. It's drug abuse something. I feel like the E must be education. I don't know what the R is.
I got nothing. Yeah.
So maybe
shows you how seriously I took that, right?
Same here. So I was curious from your perspective, did that program give us the necessary tools to prevent substance use disorder? And if not, what works better?
Yeah. So what I remember DARE. I literally remember the initials DARE, and I can sort of see that red thing. I also remember just saying no, right, which was Nancy Reagan's slogan. I don't remember the DARE program at all. So I'm not even going to try to speak to that. But what I will say is that just saying no is not a tool. And I think the idea behind that was to encourage an ability to respond confidently to peer pressure. I get what they were doing, but it reflected a very naive understanding of why people use drugs and what the risk factors are for substance use and addiction. We know a lot more about that now.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at who uses drugs, for one thing, adolescence is a very common time when this begins. And I like to be careful about the whole slippery slope thing and the whole gateway drug thing, because on one hand, it is true that alcohol use and marijuana use, especially earlier in adolescence, are a predictor of more significant problematic use and the use of other kinds of substances later on. But that kind of tends to send the message that, like, if you smoke pot when you're a junior in high school, you're going to go down that. And we just don't have strong evidence for that.
Yeah.
What we can say is that the earlier folks start using heavily, the more risk that they're at. But a lot of this does start in adolescence. When you go beyond that, we are often looking at traumatic experience, troubled families, families with limited supervision is a really big one. And it's not just about control, it's about warmth.
Yeah.
So a protective family, right, for actually any kind of adolescent risky behavior. A protective family environment has two qualities. There's parental warmth, which means listening, caring, talking about experiences and feelings in an open way, being able to listen non-judgmentally to what the youth is experiencing and how they're feeling, doing fun stuff together, right? It's just a pleasant, supportive, loving environment. And healthy, consistent discipline.
Okay.
And healthy, consistent discipline means having rules, having fair and sensible rules that are explained clearly to the youth, and then have consequences when they're broken. And those consequences are calmly and consistently enforced, not explosively and unpredictably enforced.
Yeah. And
that's the ideal environment. That's actually very protective, not just against problematic substance use, but against early risky sexual activity, against other kinds of delinquency, criminal behavior, you name it. It's helpful in terms of grades. I mean, that's just a healthy environment for kids. Okay. If you think about the opposite of that, that is more likely to be a risk factor. Trauma, abuse inside the home, a lot of conflict or neglect inside the home, that's a risk factor. Being in an environment that is unpredictable and chaotic, poverty, right? And the stress and the strain both on youth and then on their families that comes from being in an impoverished environment or a high stress environment, also risk factors. And then, of course, other kinds of mental health issues, right? There's a strong correlation between mental health problems that include anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and schizophrenia. Every brain reacts differently to every drug.
Yeah.
The way that we respond to a particular drug and our susceptibility to becoming dependent on that drug reflects a complex interaction between the drug and the way that it works, an individual's brain and how it's wired, and then the features of their situation that make them more or less susceptible to dependence generally.
Okay.
That last thing is important because a lot of what it comes down to is when we talk about substance use and especially escalating substance use, we are usually talking about being miserable. And what we're not doing a good job of is dealing with the underlying root causes of addiction, which come down to people being unhappy, not having the skills to either having extraordinary life stress or trauma and or not having the skills and the support needed to deal with that trauma in healthier ways, which lead to first experimentation with drugs and then escalating use, and then as dependence grows, it moving toward disorder. So we are not doing a good job as a society at creating the kind of larger environments that's protective against addiction.
Yeah.
We could be doing a much, much, much better job at that.
What are some of the clearest lessons that science has given us about treatment?
Right. It does depend to some extent on what substance we're talking about. For both opioid use disorder, and that includes prescription opioid painkillers, that includes heroin, that includes fentanyl, all of the drugs that work on that circuitry, and also for smoking. Medication's incredibly effective.
What medications?
Buprenorphine is one that it proves in both of those cases remarkably effective at reducing craving.
Okay.
And that's what it's doing, is helping to reduce craving for the drug during the period when you're trying to quit, right? For the opioids, there's also methadone, which has a largely similar effect. But the overall idea is to kind of reduce that sensation of jonesing for the drug, right?
Okay.
And those are massively underutilized substances.
Why?
Because people stigmatize them as being just another drug that you're addicted to. So even within the community of people who are experiencing addiction to these drugs, people talk about them as like, well, I'm not going to do that because that's still being an addict, right? That's just another drug. That's literally a biologically inaccurate description of these substances. So when we talk about, say, heroin or fentanyl, what it does is attach to certain nerve cells, neurons, right, in your brain. And it sort of mimics the effects of the neurotransmitters, the little molecules that communicate between neurons, between brain cells, that are involved in pain relief.
Okay.
Right? That's literally what it does, is why they work as pain relievers,
Yeah.
right? That's why they work as painkillers. And they activate, right? They activate those neurons. What buprenorphine and does is it helps to block the neurons, access to the neurons, the neurotransmitter receptors. It sort of puts a cap over them, right? That does just enough to reduce craving, but actually doesn't let anything else in there. So often what we're talking about is something that operates by providing a little bit of satisfaction to the neurons that are driving that sense of craving without actually providing enjoyment. So the stigmatization of these drugs often presumes that it's pleasurable to use them.
But that's not the case at
And
all.
that is actually not the case. And in fact, when we are talking about someone who's dealing with full-blown opioid addiction, it's actually not fun anymore anyway.
Yeah.
It really is just about getting rid of the sheer physical and psychological misery of not having the drug. So what these medications do is they help take the edge off that discomfort and that pain while not making you high. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. They don't actually make you high. They just make you less miserable. And that's good. That's what we want, right, when people are trying to quit. So that is a major resource there.
So,
Go
quick
ahead.
question.
Yeah.
So the perception of them being just another drug,
Right.
is that largely coming from the people who would be prescribed them, or the people is also from doctors who are prescribing them?
All of the above.
Really?
It's actually a really, really widespread misunderstanding. A lot of medical professionals who don't happen to know the details of how these drugs work. Buprenorphine's fairly recent, right?
Okay.
Who don't happen to know the details of how these drugs work are sometimes under this impression. People who use drugs are often under the same, the same impression. And then certainly a lot of members of the general public just consider these medications to be another form of addiction.
Yeah.
And it's not accurate.
Yeah.
But it is widespread, and it stops people from requesting it. It stops people from prescribing it, or in many cases even recognizing that it's available and that it works.
Right.
So for anyone, any families, any individuals who are out there, or anyone who's in a position to prescribe, right, these drugs, please be aware they are highly effective and they're an enormously powerful tool for opioid use disorder and for smoking, right? They're really, really great for that. For alcohol, for what we call the stimulant class of drugs, that's cocaine, methamphetamine, we don't have as clear-cut medications, right, that are effective. We're working on it, right? There is ongoing, it's research funded by the National Institute of Drug Abuse and the National Institutes of Health, ongoing efforts to try to identify what those would be and what those would look like, and to test them out. But we don't really have anything yet that's quite as effective there. So what we do very strongly recommend, though, for anyone dealing with these issues is talk to your medical professionals about it. Reach out for help, right? There are other forms for all of the substances that you can be addicted to. There are forms of counseling that can be very effective. Certainly cognitive behavioral therapy is a form of therapy that can be adapted to issues with addiction, and can be really helpful. A lot of people find 12-step programs really helpful. There's also a lot of controversy about them. The scientific evidence base is on the lighter side compared to, say, the research on medications and the research on better recognized, like cognitive behavioral therapy forms of psychotherapy. And it's a little complicated. So I'll just go ahead and disclose that I've actually been through a 12-step program. Not as someone who was addicted to substances myself, but as the daughter of an alcoholic. I realized when I was in my mid-30s that I just really needed help processing these issues. And for about 4 years, I attended a group called Adult Children of Alcoholics, that is a 12-step program for kids who grew up, for now adults, who grew up in families that were dealing with these issues, to sort of process what happened to you. And the steps are actually really similar.
Right.
Having been that, my take on 12-step programs, as someone who has lived through them and with them, and is also a scientist who understands the evidence around them, what I would say is they are pinging on some of the processes that are helpful for overcoming addiction, not necessarily in a systematic way.
Okay.
And we don't necessarily have great research on when it works, why it works, and for whom. What the active ingredients are of the program that are really effective. And people who have been through those programs and found them life-changing, which many of those people will tell you what they believe those are. And I'm not saying they're wrong. Yeah, sure. Right? I think that each one of us can sort of feel and experience for ourselves what aspect of a program, a very complex and lengthy program like that was transformative for us. When we talk about making recommendations for treatment for a broader group of people, it's helpful to know which are the elements of this that really had the most impact. When you say that these programs are pinging on some of the processes that help people, what specific processes are you talking about? So here, I'm gonna take my scientist hat partly off, or at least I'm going to wear two hats at once. Okay. One of those hats is someone who's been through this, and then the other is a hat of someone who knows something about the research on like what matters. Sure. So I'm guessing, but just be really clear about that. I'm going to guess that social support. I was gonna suggest community has probably a huge deal with it, right? Community is hugely important. The sense that you are supported by a community of people who understands what you're going through and accepts you for who you are. Yeah. Right? That is incredibly important. And especially given what you talked about of risk factors, you know, people who come from unstable households and stuff, if you suddenly find stability in a community, that must be incredibly powerful. Exactly. And stability and community in a group of people who are not defined by using, right? But in fact are defined by a choice not to use. Right. So that's certainly a big part of it. There's often a lot of controversy around, 12-step programs are very clear. You need a belief in a higher power. They don't always use the word God.
Yeah.
It's often higher power, right? And to be super clear, like higher power can be whatever you choose. Like
Yeah.
if you're like the universe is my higher power, that's great. That's fine. That'll work just fine. But how important is that and why? I'm just going to put on the table a bet that what we're really talking about is, again, the belief that I have support. It's not all on me and everything is not in my control, right? It's that broader sense of security. There's some security out there for me that is often lacking in people who have had a variety of different kinds of traumatic experience, right? So that can be a really powerful ingredient. Rules are helpful, right? And there's a lot of debate and argument over the specific rules that are embedded in 12-step programs and under what contexts. But certainly a sense of structure. It is structure can be really, really valuable in going through recovery. So I think those are some of the elements that are really important. And finding a way to integrate this experience into your worldview that offers some hope.
Yeah.
Hopelessness is such a powerful and pervasive part of the experience of addiction that people have. And something that helps pull outside of that is really meaningful.
Again, I'm seeing shades of what goes into prevention in a familial unit.
Exactly.
Warmth, support, connection, openness, security, all that.
Consistent discipline.
Consistent discipline, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you can make the case that that's just what we need as humans.
Yeah,
right.
It's kind of, that's where you're leading me.
Safety, warmth, support, a consistent environment, right?
You mentioned it a few times, stigma. And I kind of wanted to talk about that broadly.
Yeah.
We don't treat substance use disorder or addiction like any other disease. It's commonly viewed as a personal failing,
right,
opposed to a systemic one. What effect do you think that has on both prevention and treatment?
Oh, it's a huge problem. So from a treatment perspective, one thing that we have pretty solid evidence of is that stigma, that societal stigma, and especially when it's coming from loved ones in your community, gets internalized, right? So, I think you're very right that at the heart of substance use disorder stigma is the belief that it's about you, that there's something wrong with you, that it's a personal failure. In a way, just say no, the damage that it did was sending the message that if you have problems in this space, it was a choice that you made.
Yeah.
People talk about personal choices being bad choices, that it is your fault, that all it would have taken was good judgment and willpower. If you had just had the willpower and the good judgment to say no, none of this would have happened. And the problem with that is that it takes all of it and blames it on and attributes it to the person who's dealing with addiction. And when that gets internalized, what you get is what we call the why try effect. It's the belief that I am defective. I am the problem. This is my fault. I must not have self-control if I'm dealing with these issues. I must not have worth, right? Because that's what you're hearing from everybody around you. And it's like, well, then why even bother trying? And
it's the root of that hopelessness that you talked about.
It's the root of hopelessness. It's very much the root of hopelessness, and it interferes with asking for help in any part of your life, whether it's with, to stabilize, right? To get into a place where getting clean is even an option and feels like an okay thing to do. So it interferes with seeking help with medical care. It interferes with seeking help with housing, seeking help with food and basic supplies, and it certainly interferes with help with getting treatment. So it's hugely problematic. Yeah.
The viewpoint that it is a personal problem, it's a result of personal choices. This is not a uniquely American viewpoint, right? Is it? Because my other question was, do other countries treat this with less stigma, which I assume, there's a spectrum of it, but
yes. What I will say is I do not have the knowledge to make a statement about like internationally across the board. What I will say is that, okay, two things. The first, the U.S. is at the worldwide extreme by a pretty wide margin in what we call individualism, which is the general belief that we exist as individuals and that's our predominant identity, right? And this is everything from when I'm asked to describe myself, what I tell you is things about me, my accomplishments, my demographics, my experiences, my job, things that are about me. I don't start telling you about my relationships. I don't start telling you about the groups that I belong to, right? It's about me as separate from other people, as different from other people, is my sense of identity. What that carries over to is a very powerful belief that we create our own outcomes. And on one hand, I mean, we do contribute to our own outcomes. There's no question of that. But there's also a lot of relational and societal and environmental context that contributes to our outcomes too. Most other countries in the world are better at acknowledging the contexts, the situations around us that shape our outcomes than we are. The U.S. is really at one extreme on that. So there is that issue. And then that ends up playing out in terms of the communities that we create to support people. So, the U.S. is, in terms of its medical care structure, right, among developed countries in the world, pretty appalling in how we handle Medicare. There's really not a lot of safety net. There's just not a lot of safety net, period.
Yeah.
And that ends up contributing to the kind of risk factors that we were talking about for experiencing addiction, right? So other countries do a better job of kind of, I think, understanding that these problems are not just localized within the individuals who are going through them. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways, where it's like, yes, you don't have the medical or social support you might need to not succumb to substance use disorder. But if you do,
it's your fault.
It's your problem.
It's your fault. Right. Exactly.
So, okay. So we've covered treatment. We've covered prevention. I kind of want to hear what SATRN is doing to further these things. You talked about how long it takes research to make it into practice. Right. Why does it take so long? And then what is SATRN doing to try to push forward the new research into practice?
Right. So the reason it takes so long is where science ends up, right? Science ends up in journal articles. Who reads journal articles?
Scientists.
Other scientists. So you're really talking about the science making its way to organizations such as the CDC, right? The broader health infrastructure of the United States to make recommendations for practice. So, for example, the Public Health Service in the United States has a series of recommendations for screenings, for treatments, right? There's actually a playbook, and insurance companies go with that, right? So there's actually a whole infrastructure that sort of defines what appropriate care is in a lot of ways. It's got to make its way from the science into that, and then that's how stuff starts making its way into care. That's within the formal medical community. Once we start talking about treatment availability and prevention organizations that are outside of that, it's really pretty haphazard. I mean, if you are running a sober living home, accessing the evidence and having the means to understand its implications is extraordinarily difficult. So we just don't have very good channels for communicating that a lot of the time. So one of the things that we do with SATRN is we have brown bag lunches We do online talks that sort of present cutting edge science and talk about its implications. And a lot of our attendees are other researchers, but we have folks from the community come in as well. ASU and SATRN are now embedded within a larger national network now. It is a network within the NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Abuse, which is one of the NIH agencies. So we're now part of a broader network of folks who are developing these talks that are accessible to community practitioners. We have also for a long time had a seed grant program. It's not active right at this moment. We could certainly use some more funding for it. That would be fabulous. But a seed grant program that actually partnered academic researchers and community practitioners to define a research question, something that's considered really important by both of those groups, and then go get some preliminary data to look at it. Sometimes that data is enough to answer the question, but often it's the starting point for a grant proposal.
Right.
That says, we got a handle on this, but now let's go really get some funding to do some really cutting edge research on this. So that's another of our activities. We do a certain amount of consulting with community organizations around best practices if they need a little help looking at their data or they have a question that they need answered. We sometimes partner with folks to do some science. And for the last couple of years, I've actually been working with the Public Health Office of the City of Phoenix as a consultant. We actually have an intergovernmental agreement with them to support their substance use related activities and sort of provide an evidence base, some assistance with gathering new data, interpreting the data, and then advising on the plan, right, for dealing with substance use related issues in the city.
Based on your experience, what do you wish the public knew or, we did differently, I suppose, when it comes to supporting people struggling with substance use disorder?
Yeah. Thing number one, the why is this happening, right? It's not, and there's a strong science behind this, it's not that people who are dealing with addiction are bad people. It's not that they just made bad choices and that's all there is to it. No, they couldn't just stop if they tried and had some willpower. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
It is in every case, it is a complicated combination of the brains that they were born with, the experiences they stumbled across typically as kids, as teenagers, and the experiences in their background, right, that are contributing to this. All it takes is willpower, it's all about character narratives are not consistent with science. So when we're talking about someone who is dealing with addiction, having some compassion for that, that's really important. Getting out of that space of blaming people for what they're going through and understanding that the background behind what they're going through is really complicated and maybe very, very dark in ways that you may or may not know about.
Yeah.
Right. So that's issue number one. And then I think the other thing is that you can have boundaries and compassion at the same time, right? We are all allowed, especially those of us who are dealing with or have dealt with people in our lives, loved ones, friends, family members, neighbors, whoever it is, who are bringing the problems in their lives into our lives. We are allowed to put some reasonable boundaries around that to protect ourselves. That's okay. But to the extent possible, what you want to do that without giving up hope in the person, because that hope, that knowledge of love, that knowledge of support within the context of those boundaries is a lifeline, is an absolute lifeline for treatment, right? For getting some help and getting some hope back and trying to make positive change in your life. So those are two things that I really wish people knew, so that the dialogue we were having around this, both in the abstract and when we're really talking about someone we know and care for who's dealing with these issues, gets more compassionate and more sane. And for other forms of addiction, there are evidence-based forms of therapy that really can work. So don't give up. Just don't give up hope. That's the big one.
Well, thank you for joining us, Lani. I think this was really interesting. I learned a lot, and I hope our audience did too.
No, great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for tuning into Lab Coat Optional. We are a production of the Strategic Marketing Communications team at Arizona State University's Knowledge Enterprise. Knowledge Enterprise is led by Executive Vice President Sally C. Morton. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. If you found us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We are at the mercy of the mighty, fickle algorithms, and stuff like that helps people find the show. As always, lab coats are optional on this show, but we want to keep our researchers safe in the lab. So wear your PPE. Until next time, stay curious.